If you like, you can all move to the front as well, just like in church. You know, come on down. Okay. Well, looks like we've got who we're going to have. I'm Sam Denard, one of the volunteers that helps make NAISG and HouSecCon go. And just by way of advertisement, you can also share in that joy. We can use the help. Okay. But at the moment, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Jason Brvenik. He is an expert in Snort. He is a Sourcefire security fellow. He is a part of the Sourcefire vulnerability research team. And he used to work for what is now 2 of the big 8, now that they've merged. Okay.
Call them the remaining 3.
Exactly. Okay. He's well qualified to give us his presentation today. Please welcome Jason.
Hello, everyone. There you go. The question is, can you hear me or do I need to use the mic? Use the mic? Okay, I have to use the mic. So, Snort. How many people here know what Snort is? Have you used it? Show of hands. Actively use it? All right. So we're here to talk about dynamic security, evolving worlds, kind of the difference between how it used to be done and how it's done today. So you know Snort from days of old, 1998, a couple signatures, and that was life. Life was good, right? You had little small networks, and there were about 30 attacks total you had to worry about. Yeah, maybe 10 years ago it was that. Today, it's a far different landscape. How many vulnerabilities did Microsoft patch in the last Tuesday? Anyone want to? 30-ish? And that's just one company. Adobe, Oracle, Mozilla, everybody else says, 30 a month is about a norm for any given product these days. Here's the problem. Your network moves so fast and the threats evolve so quickly that you can't use the old school fire and forget IDS, IPS. So a dynamic world, that's what we're living in. If you were to look at your network, take a snapshot, how many people here scan their networks with a vuln scanner or a, Nmap or something like that? Now, if I can ask you, when you scan your network, do you do it daily, weekly, monthly? Weekly? How different is it every week? About the same number of computers, same number of services, same number of vulns, or does it change constantly? And then what do? So you found a new machine, it's Windows XP, hasn't been patched, you call the help desk, right? And say, hey, you gotta fix this machine, and then they work on finding it. And next week it's probably still there, and it probably stays for 2 or 3 scan cycles, and then it disappears. Do you do anything with your protection infrastructure in that 3-week window before they find the machine and remediate it? No, you can't. Here's the problem. Your network changes too fast and exists in too many places for you to actually physically, manually make adjustments. And so that's led us to these systems where first you just trust me, I'll tell you what you need to run, right? Set your policies and leave them be. We don't believe that's appropriate. We don't believe it's effective either. So that machine, that XP machine that's been in the network for 3 weeks, turns out it was a virtual machine on some developer's desktop, and they were testing something, and they were done, and so they turned it off, and that's how it finally disappeared, right? Cloud virtual endpoint challenges are so dynamic that we can't, as practitioners, hope to keep up with the change in our networks. You have a 2,000 person network, there's no way, you couldn't staff 20 people to keep up with everything that changes in there every day, right? So you need dynamic security. We look at the impact of kind of a static security posture and a system that doesn't allow you to adapt with the network. You might come up with some of these words. Take a new person, plug them into your network, and ask them to secure it. This is their first 3 months. Trying to figure out what's happening, wondering why it's even happening. If I could ask another question, how many people work at companies that have had networks established for greater than 10 years? And on those networks, how many people have been able to totally refresh them and come out with brand new builds of things? Secure, right? Secure builds of operating systems and software packages and everything else. You can't. The companies just don't work that way. But bewilderment for the new people that show up, they're like, why isn't this set up? Yeah. So we face these powerful threats. Hackers. They're scary people, aren't they? They're just like you and me, by the way. Right? They're just like you and me. They just have different motivations. The problem is they have lots of things that they can work from, and they come in many forms. Let's look at hackers, script kiddies, advanced persistent threats. How many people love APT? Isn't it a great term? Yeah, APT. Do you think it's a real problem for commercial entities? Yes? No? Do you lose sleep over it? There's a hacker in my network. How many people think their networks are currently compromised? How many people think their networks will always be compromised? Yeah. What's our job in doing security in a network that we accept is constantly compromised? Well, it's to minimize the amount of risk and what they're able to get away with, right? You're never going to get them out of your network. Why? Because they're focused, organized, innovative. They're not encumbered by process and change control. They're not encumbered by uptime. They're not encumbered by P&L. They need something, they do something. They want to change the way they approach a target, they change the way they approach the target. They don't have to go to change control board to release a new attack, drop new code on you. They're also relentless. They get bonuses just like we do. Right? You achieve your goal, you need to compromise RSA, I'll give you an extra $50,000 this quarter. Go do it. They get 50K when they compromise RSA, right? It's pretty motivating for them. I don't know if that's a real number or not, but it's still pretty motivating when you think about it. They have a salary. And so we deploy these technologies, AV and IPS and firewall and proxies and all this other stuff. And what happens? I love the quote, right? The better we get, the more deviant and creative they get. And this is essentially what we're dealing with. We're trying to protect our networks with walls. Right? It doesn't really work, but this is, in essence, modern day defense for networks. We build it, we put it in, we leave it be. It doesn't work well. And it's driven by black box solutions. Systems, you set them up, you plug them in, you click a couple default settings, you say go, and then you wait for events and you call the help desk and they fix things, and you might have an incident or two you deal with, you have to deploy patches and everything else, right? But that's a losing game. The system itself needs to know what to protect and the threats you face in order to have a hope of winning. Can anybody tell me in the last Microsoft Tuesday how quickly that got deployed in the network, the patches, on average? A week? A day? I'm sorry? 7 days. How long does it take an attacker to turn that patch into exploitable conditions? 4 hours. Yes. Binary code, 4 hours. What just happened? Did we win? No. No, we absolutely lost this game. So it takes us 7 days to get the patch deployed, and we had to test it, make sure it didn't break anything, even though it still breaks things when you deploy it. And it took the attacker 4 hours to turn it into usable exploitation. So let's just say 6 days of Delta. What do you do in those 6 days? JV help you? Does firewall help you? Do you increase monitoring? What do you do? Okay. Well, in our ideal world, we've got coverage in, well, the moment the patch is released in products, whether it be a firewall or the next-gen firewalls, as they call them, or the IPS. But here's the next problem. If a vulnerability affects Windows XP and Windows 2000, but not, Windows 7, what do? Do you turn it on for everything? How many people have experienced a false positive? Come on. I know I have. How many have experienced a false positive that took out a business critical application? I have. All right? So having the system know where the vulnerabilities are and automatically enable protections are what we believe the ideal situation is. It can recommend to you what should be done. It could act upon it on its own and do it. Most people aren't quite comfortable with that yet. It takes them a couple months before they accept that, right? And in the absence of that, we have to assume our people are what? Well, we already disproved this. There's no way that you, even having the tools, can be as vigilant and responsive as your adversary is. 7 days to get a patch on your network, 4 hours for him to turn it into something useful for him. Right? That leads us to the fundamental question. Right? Is it a fair fight? Is building walls good in an age where we have jets? The attackers are flying jets right over our walls, shooting into our castle courtyards. Right? It's no longer a land-based attack. They're no longer coming in the door and taking pieces of paper off the printer. Although I think printers are the greatest things to compromise in a network, by the way. When's the last time you patched a printer? Anybody? No. What does a printer typically run? What's its operating system? Usually some form of Linux. Does it have a web browser? Or a web server, I'm sorry? FTP? Telnet? Big hard drive? And where do all the important documents in a company end up going? To the fancy printer, right? Every contract goes through that fancy printer too. When they put it down, they scan it so they can electronically file it. And we never patch them. In your security technologies, whether it be NAC or AV or IPS or firewall, is there some selection for HP printers? I want to protect my printers. No? Would you put an IPS in front of your printer and just turn on all the rules? Anybody? No? A smart enough system, modern defenses that you could bring to the table, we refer to them as next generation IPS, would know that printer is running Apache and what version of Apache it is. It would know that it's Linux based. It would know that it offers FTP. It would know that it offers Telnet. And it would know what the associated vulnerabilities for those versions are in that operating system. And it would turn on just protection for those things. And it would do that, and it would minimize your business risk of having an IPS in the network where things get printed. What happens when a printer breaks in a network, by the way? Anybody here work a help desk that has to deal with that anytime in their life? When the printer isn't working, you get lots of calls. And the problem to the business is they feel like business can't be done because they can't print stuff. And it's, high priority. Everybody knows your problem's the highest priority there is. So if you put a system in place that isn't aware of this and it starts doing things like blocking Windows-based attacks for a Linux-based target that is your printer, then you run into that mix of false positive, right? Because it's not really a false positive. It couldn't be any vulnerability exploited. It's a Linux machine. So a system that knows it. It knows the users, it knows the behaviors, it knows the operating systems, and allows you to overlay a policy on that so that it can adapt on its own. Would be ideal. SQL Slammer. Everybody remember SQL Slammer? Anybody? Mm-hmm. How about what's Code Red? I bet today you still have Code Red events on your border. Anybody have an IDS out there that kind of alerts you to it? How many do you get a day? A lot? This is a decade-old threat. Only affects Windows, only affects NT and IIS, what is it, 5.0, I think, 4.0, 5.0. Still out there. That tells us how vigilant and responsive people are, by the way. A 10-year-old vulnerability existing and still haunting the internet. If you were to deploy a machine that were vulnerable today, you would be compromised within minutes. Problem is, they're all valid events. They're all valid attacks. They really did happen. They just weren't successful, right? So in your classic incident response cycle, you've got 100,000 of these things a day that you would have to go investigate. if you were really looking at all of the real attacks that happened on the network. If you didn't have the context of a Windows machine or the XP or NT4 running IIS as the target, or it was a Linux target or an Apache target, you would in essence be forced to do what we do today, which is ignore those events because, well, I don't know if anything was vulnerable, nothing else changed. Right until the developer starts that VM to try something on. So we think next-gen IPS, by the way, how many people have heard of RNA? Real-time network awareness. It kind of drives our IPS tech in that it observes the network, it notices all these things, services, users, ports, protocols, applications, operating systems, and creates these vulnerability maps, right? And empowers the system to make these changes. But that's not good enough. You have to be able to do it fast, right? You have to, these are NSS data points, I believe, from the last group test. If the system ends up slowing the network, what happens to it? It gets turned off, just like AV on the desktop, right? If you can't get your job done, you end up turning it off and then everybody loses. You gotta have strong performance while you do it. And it needs to be accurate. It needs to cut out your 100,000 events. It needs to make them the one event that matters, the two events that matter, right? That's what we believe is appropriate. It needs to have the best detection possible. Now we think we have that. It's been verified through consistent testing with independent labs. However, that's not enough. Just knowing about the attacks and stopping the attacks, not enough. Especially in today's world, I think the last presenter talked about Facebook and the threats it represents. How many people have a corporate policy against social networking for the average employee? 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah. Are you able to enforce it? Yeah, kind of, maybe. You could enforce it? You get fired. Well, that's one way to enforce it. Do you even know if they're doing it? Yeah. What about web-based email? No? No policy against web-based email? I love this, by the way. Can't send an attachment because my email system says it's too big. Can't send an attachment because my email system says it's in a disallowed file type. What do employees do? What? They do. They log into their Yahoo Mail or their Gmail and they send it that way. Or the contract and your system rejects it. How many people have witnessed this in the security space, witnessed this happen? Person's trying to do business with another organization. They have to get contracts back and forth. The other organization, maybe they were compromised. Maybe the Word document does have a virus in it, right? And your gateway blocks it. Bad, virus, we got protections, can't help you. Deadline, quarter's coming to an end, got to get this contract signed so the business can move forward. What does your employee do? I don't care, send it to my personal email, send it over to Gmail, I'll download it from there, right? And they execute the contract and they get infected just like everything else. You need to be able to cover the applications specifically that you think are appropriate for your business. And while it's a policy enforcement point, it reduces your threat posture. So instead of saying Facebook's not allowed, but I really can't do anything about it, Gmail's not allowed, but I can't do anything about it, we only run Windows on our network, we only run Linux, we only run Mac, whatever. Our data center doesn't run anything older than Windows 2000, and having no way to enforce that or even be aware that it's different. The system should let you know. It should also bring us to the next point, which is next-gen firewall, allow you to enforce it. It should allow you to know that a person in accounting will be working with the outsourced Oracle instances, and a person in sales will only be working with Salesforce or whatever your CRM is, right? It should allow you to know that Facebook is allowed for the marketing department because they have to do their social media campaigns, but it's not allowed for your sales team. And it should allow you to make those decisions. So, I'm not so sure. Oh, it did display fine, okay. All right, we're coming to market with it, I think it releases in a month, a next-gen firewall. Now it's based on IPS technologies, right? The best IPS available in the market is kind of the core threat prevention engine. Firewalling itself, I got another slide that illustrates this well. We believe that the two work very well together. Now, we don't believe that one will replace the other. How many people here, if the perfect firewall existed today that could do IPS, application control, standard firewalling at the border, and VPN, and all of those things, would replace their existing firewalls for it? Oh, and we're free. I gave it to you. Would you replace all your firewalls? No, so you need a transition path. So right now people start thinking, but you guys are the snort people. You do IPS, with firewalls? I think this is a great graphic for representing it. Next gen firewall defined as classic firewall. Stateful firewall, I guess, is the way to refer to it. Now, do you guys think stateful firewalls work? Anybody? Are firewalls a security device? Yeah? I don't think they are. I really don't, especially in today's world. Firewalls are more of a access control device, not so much security. They're more of a, you must be this tall to ride this ride bar. HTTP is the new TCP if you missed the memo, right? Everything runs over port 80 and 443 today. VPN, security device. NAT, security device. Access control, operational, what are they, right? They're filtering devices for very basic stuff. App control, IPS, however, are different. And this graphic attempts to illustrate the level of difficulty in doing stateful firewall. Pretty easy, in green. App control, you could probably do app control if you wanted to think about the level of effort. Data inspected in the first 128 bytes of every packet would probably tell you all you needed to do for application control. IPS, not so much. You have to inspect every byte of every packet of every day, right? There's no singular good packet you don't have to look at. We'd like to think there is, but there isn't. And so in level of difficulty, we've got already the vast majority of it handled. We need to add some stateful firewalling features. And overlay a policy that makes sense to firewall groups, operational groups that maintain policy enforcement, not security groups that do incident response and threat mitigation. Right? And then we have another piece that fits into our kind of overall strategy, which is Immunet. Has anyone heard of Immunet? How about ClamAV? Anybody? Yeah, 1, 2. ClamAV is our open source AV product. It runs on the vast majority of mail gateways out there. Immunet is an endpoint protection product. We call it malware control, I guess. Their mission, reinvent endpoint defense. How many people run AV in their company? I do. How many people think it's effective? AV deployment stopped something. Say what? Daily? How many times do you still have to respond to new viruses? Daily. Some stats I'll share with you. 48 to 50% effectiveness for any given AV. And if you think about the process, you can understand why. Let's say you are patient zero for some new threat, some new worm. What do? You upload it to your AV vendor? Yeah. Virus total, maybe. All comes back negative, 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 negative. Maybe somebody comes back with heuristic detect on it. Then what happens? The AV vendor sits on it and they wait for other people to come up with it. But another stat for you, 78% of malware that is observed today is unique to its target. So they never see additional infections. You're only ever going to see it once, in one place, at one time. So the traditional method of bubbling up the, quote, high-risk threats doesn't work. Why is it different? How can it be done differently? That's what Immunet wanted to look at. We picked them up in January because I think, clearly we thought they were doing it right. Cloud-based, real-time updates. 300 meg, 100 meg, gigabit. How big are your virus definitions on average? Okay. I'd say an average is 100 meg update a day for AV if you're staying on top of it. It's a lot of data to push around on your network. And if we take patch management as an example, there's going to be a 30% failure rate in deploying them. And this is an update that happened after things got bubbled up. Remember, 78% of it, never going to be seen in your network. There's a way, we think, to do this without having to push out updates, to be real time, what we call collective immunity. We should exist with existing AV, because really nobody wants to pull out their AV any more than they want to pull out their firewall. We should make it customizable, personalized protections, kind of core to our being. And we should make it so that communities of people share protections, if you will. So think about how the APT threat, I hate to use APT, but think about how that threat propagates through a network. If you're an attacker and you have to compromise a network and all your tricks have failed and you need to bring out a new O day, never before seen, never before released, but you need to do it to win. You want to get into RSA and win. You got to burn it. If you're going to burn it at RSA, are you going to burn it elsewhere? Probably, right? If I burn it once, I might as well get my value out of it. And if you have a campaign against, I don't know, government contractors, do you think maybe you'll burn the same O day at all of them at the same time? Right? If I got to compromise Lockheed and Grumman and all these guys, I'm gonna use the same one over and over until it's patched, because I really only have 14 days from the time I start to the time it gets discovered. Communities of like organizations tend to see similar infection vectors is kind of the fundamentals. And so I think this is an animated graphic of ultimately how it's different. Your classic AV agent, right? 30 to 350 megs in size with a gig of definitions on your desktop. New file, it gets scanned, right? Perhaps you'll do a DNS request to the internet, right? And it's a one-to-one match. A one-to-one match meaning I took a SHA or an MD5, I did a DNS query, and I got an answer back, right? Like maybe not found means it's good, and well, I found it, so it's not good, right? Classic AV model, not gonna work so well. When we overlay the way we do it, it's a little bit different. I'll have to explain this to you. One-to-one we have, SHA matching. Prevalence. So if we know 78% of all malware is unique, then if we only ever see one binary, one, and nobody else has it, is it good or bad? If I just flip a coin, what are my chances of being correct? Right? If I just say all new things are bad, I have a 78% chance of being right. That's 30% better than my existing technologies, and all I did was say it's bad. If I see it in 300 places, 3,000, 3 million, then I know it's probably good. I didn't do anything other than look at how many people have this binary. Right? Temporal, how fast is it moving, generics. Cloud recall, I think, is another key element, though. But before I get to cloud recall, let's talk about how a typical response would work. You are on your computer, you go to a web page, dropper happens, things happen, my agent sees it. It sees new stuff get installed, but nothing changes. So we say, okay, allow it to run. We're gonna let it be, and you're gonna be patient zero, and we're just gonna observe. And then all of a sudden, your machine starts sending emails to all your friends. And all your friends start having the same binary downloaded. Well, we know that it's moving fast and that it's doing things automatically, downloading for you. We can now take Cloud Recall and say, even though I allowed it to run on your machine and these 50 other people had no knowledge of, badness, I'm now determining it's bad, and I'm reversing my decision and saying, no good, remove it. Right? So things like Dancing Baby. Everybody remember the Dancing Baby video? I think it was awesome, wasn't it? How fast did that move among your family and friends and everything else? I think it was an hour before the whole company was looking at the same video back in the day. If that were a virus today, a worm, a dropper, a Trojan, whatever, you would have an entire company in probably an hour and a half. Classic AV, wouldn't know about it because nobody uploaded it yet. Now you got a week before you get a real definition that says it's bad, and the attacker's been on your network for a week. Cloud Recall allows us to see that change in the behavior and immediately determine that we're going to block it and uninstall it. So instead of a week from the time somebody uploads it to you get your definitions and it gets removed, we can, in minutes, right? We see that this instance here turned into 100,000 instances. We decide it's bad. Everybody that's running the agent can now be informed that this is no longer good. We uninstall it for you. Right? Kind of neat, I think. Comparisons. I think this is the obligatory chart of feature function, right? 1 day to a month for sample collection, a day to 2 weeks. Has anybody ever uploaded a sample to an AV vendor and gotten a response in a day? I haven't, but I don't have those big fancy contracts with them either. It's possible. An hour to a day to publish once it's out, and up to 350 megs in footprint. We like to keep things real light, real simple. 200 millisecond response time, by the way, from the cloud. So the common question is, well, if all your queries are going to the cloud and you do this recall stuff and everything else, isn't that going to slow down my machine? And my response to that is, your machine's already slow from AV. Scanning a gigabit definition for every execution document opened is slow. I can give you a response in 200 milliseconds, and it is relevant to the entire user base, whether it be your organization or the world as a whole, and make decisions pretty quickly. All right. We're bringing it to the enterprise, web-based management group policies, all that stuff, right? But if you break down all of this, what we believe is that this is the right solution. That the cloud, if you will, the network, will bring a collective immunity to people. That you can ultimately share relevant information so that everybody becomes protected at once, instead of everybody having to take action to get protection. Does that make sense? I shouldn't have to give you data updates. I shouldn't have to give you signature updates. The system should be able to subscribe to these things and know that they're happening. And based on some real simple observations, we should be able to make appropriate decisions for your network. That's what we call next generation. We refer to it as, cloud to core protection. Really, it's cloud to endpoint protection, but right. So, are there any questions about what I said? Is everybody falling asleep yet? Lost? Bored? Hungry? Yes.
What do you do about if our company develops something new and pushes it out? Now you've got a new binary out there and it's starting up on.
Right. We're able to track update agents and see that binaries are dropped through updaters, like SMS. We're able to allow organizations to create custom, so you might sign your binary, you might say this is whitelisted. There's a number of actions you can take on that through the console to handle it. We would see that it's localized to you, that it was built by one of your people through a compiler and all kinds of different stuff, right? When you get to the edge cases like that, there's certainly situations, right, that you might want to see. However, how many people run custom applications, right? And how many people install them in random locations? Not many. You know what your application is. You know that it should be whitelisted. You know that it should be allowed to run. You put your whitelist up, you go deploy. And it's only local to you. If that application shows up somewhere else, they don't get the whitelisting for it. Right. Make sense? Other questions? Anybody, nobody? Yes, sir. Sure. So the decisions are cached. There is a CLAM AV engine in the background. If you want to have classic AV definitions that you can use, you can download those. I'm simply going to say, though, that I don't believe that there's any system that's truly offline. And what I mean by that is it wouldn't be a threat if it were offline. You could lock it down otherwise, right? If you have to deploy local, highly constrained blacklists and whitelists, right, that's where the customization comes in. A SCADA system's fairly static. It should be fairly static, right? It should have very well-known environmentals that you can whitelist and then create outright policy. Nothing new is allowed until I change it, and allow those decisions to be cached. The problem is, let's say, I don't know, the more common question around that is, laptops, they're at work, they're plugged in, we're doing our work, and then we leave and we're on the road. We're doing presentations like this right here. Somebody hands you a USB stick and you check it out, you plug it, your machine became infected and you weren't connected to a network, so you were unable to check for new definitions, right? Well, it can't connect to anything and steal data from you at the moment. When you do connect to the network, you'll immediately be queried on it, right? So you have a couple seconds while you're on the network that it could do something before the cloud becomes aware of it and can make a decision on it. So, there's definitely edge cases where it's not the perfect solution, but I'll argue there is no perfect solution, especially in the static world that we deal with today. Make sense? Any other questions? All right, well, thanks for listening, or letting me listen, letting me ramble.